Probably the initial topic that I'd like to discuss is a very new version of the understanding of the constitution of the iris, including the physiology of its formation. And I think that would be a very good thing to help us understand how the structure of the iris can be used as an indicator of the existing difficulties that a person needs to address and feel responsible for and resolve. Later on, the symptoms of those different types are very useful. My only way to describe it really is consider it like a stack of pancakes. The bottom pancake is the kinesthetic or the stream constitution. This kinesthetic or stream constitution is actually the formation of the vascular system and collagen in the iris of the eye. Now, the pattern that it forms very much is a reflection of the unresolved feelings in the family tree. So later on, this sense of kinesthetic is going to be very much involved in the relationship between mother and father and the constitution of the iris related to the number of stream profiles or stream lines are going to be a result of that relationship. So a lifelong personality that desires the tactile cohesiveness, very characteristic of the stream. We could go into a more thorough detail, but it has like an emotional topography of holding. And yet the layer right above it, the flower layer, is embedded in the stream layer, but now is the emotionally dynamic layer. That emotionally dynamic layer or pancake, first one being the kinesthetic or stream, the second one being the flower, and the characteristic movement of the flower and all of the mannerisms of the flower. So the personality functions of the flower portion of the pancake stack is how flower types, they attract people to them and they repulse them. They attract and repulse. They're oftentimes visually desiring to be seen.
Especially for Joe.
They're emotionally sticky. And they can also be visually manipulative, flirtatious, but they draw them in and they push them away. They draw them in and they push them away. And so on that layer, there's a fluidness that's characteristic of the flower structure, even though it's embedded within the stream structure and doesn't change constitutionally. Then above that layer is the jewel layer, where their primary mechanisms are more point-like. They're not holding, they're not waving, they're point-like. And it's how people use their tell and call. Tell people, call people. And yes, it's relating to analysis and functions of the mind, but it's above the feeling one and further above the constrictive qualities of the stream. So the stream has a double constrictive because it has two parts, the flower pattern and the jewel, kind of like a claw, right? This now opens up the fourth category, which is upwardly mobile expansive. Upwardly mobile expansive is the shaker flow, or the pattern which moves dynamics. You could describe the personalities, characteristics, symptoms, and so on, but the best way I know of now to describe it is somewhat, these are like if you were to drop a single drop of water on a hot skillet, you end up with a skitter pattern or a splatter pattern. So in a way, each one of these constitutional types is how that soul responded to the first experience of fear. So the iris is a reflection of the different forms of fear. How does someone respond to in a default mode of fear? For example, the stream type in their default mode wants security and containment. Security and containment. And they're oftentimes afraid of falling. They're afraid of insecurity within that. So their default response is to produce a personality which is consolidating, cohesive, and desires tactile holding. The emotional one, their default mechanism of fear is to gather other people to make them okay. They find a way to flower type other people into their existence so they can be seen, they can be felt, they can be gooey and sticky with how they emotionally manipulate or emotionally control. All four of these have their own mechanisms of control. All four of them have their own mechanisms about how they communicate. But all four of them are a reflection of fear. So the audit is more associated with the flower. They're more afraid of spatial perception. So a loud noise from any direction, and they go into an emotionally reactive way of desiring security. Much more can be said about each one of these first two. Then there's the third one, is what does the jewel type do when it's faced with fear? It goes into analysis, it goes into control, it goes into tell, it goes into isolated separation on the mind level. So certain types that are jewels escape in through the mind. Other ones escape into emotional reaction. Stream types escape into neuroses. The shaker type escapes into, I'm out of here. Freedom. I gotta have freedom. I'm going. Don't hold me back. Fear of suffocation, claustrophobic, being held back, constrained. So you can bring in a whole bunch of different types of fears, but the iris is actually more of an indicator of the constitutional default fears that you have. And probably the most important thing for a person to address first is what is the innate constitutional fear that my iris corresponds to or represents. So each iris will have a corresponding collection of fears. Now the interesting thing about that is that each one of these fears will be, for example, fear in the flower area oftentimes is a relationship-oriented fear. And the shaker pattern, it is usually authority issues. The stream pattern, it's a security issue. Jewel pattern, it's really a fear of criticism or being controlled by others. So the constitutional pattern is beautiful for being able to do that. Then the individual positions actually show you which one of the grandparents contributed the corresponding fear. And perhaps the most important is the lower medial crossover position, because the lower medial portion of the iris is going to be number 1 and number 1, and the primary issue in this region is going to be the root cause of fear. It's about the root embodiment of fear. Lower medial, the whole iris is going to show fear, but the lower medial is going to show oftentimes parental fear. A father being afraid of his mother, a mother being afraid of her father. Now the reason that this is so important is that this transition of my soul's relationship to my parents' parents is going to eventually be how I treat other people. Because how I'm treated by my parents is usually how I'm going to treat myself. how my parents treated their parents is how I'm going to treat other people. So by being able to look at these configurations, iris constitution, and the sectors of the lower medial, we get a opposite gender relationship pattern. Why is opposite gender so important? Because the opposite gender is going to be the formation of the stream, mother and father corresponding to the development of the stream, particularly under the age of 2, definitely, but before birth, the formations of the stream and the flower are formed. But the formation of the jewel and the shaker are subsequent to birth, which is really the phenomenon of looking at the outside world. So looking at the outside world is really more of an element of grandparents. So I'm personally excited to see the structure of the iris now as a map of what fears do I need to voluntarily address that I normally do not address because my default mechanism will automatically take me away from the experience of a fear. If I'm a jewel, my automatic mechanism for avoiding or controlling a fear is going to be analysis or mind.
I've got to be right.
Got to be right. And then my method of controlling it if I'm a flower is emotionally reactive. Blame, passive, anger, aggressive, evasive, denial, escapism. You get the basic feeling of it?
Yeah. So in the so those two primary lessons that the mother's father, mother's father and father's mother is responsibility and humility.
That's correct. And it is the very first step that opens the key to the entire sequence. In the same way that the bottom of the spine, interesting enough, regulates the life force coming through the spine. So if that bottom force is constricted by fear, there is no life force coming through. So the primary means of being able to access that number one area at the bottom of the spine is oftentimes directly related to how the mother felt about her father and the father felt about his mother and how the parents felt about each other. Now, if there is no love between them and there's no tactile, then it's going to be reflected in the child's formation of the stream constitution. Now, later on, there may be a specific lineage according to the birth order that's arriving as the primary clay to be the type of shape that's being created by the response to fear.
So, Denny, how would you relate the fear to, say, responsibility on the one hand and humility on the other hand? So if somebody's going yang and they're one girl and they're either too responsible or they're...
We can never be too responsible. We can only be unloving trying to be responsible.
Sure.
If the responsibility is externally directed, it's going to be the control of other people as a way of denying one's own feelings. That's the only way I can see that work. But the responsibility of the soul, I need to accept to make the choice. I need to accept my free will opportunity to make a choice to be responsible. And that responsibility is I'm going to choose to recognize I'm the only one who's going to change my awareness or my degree of love. I am the only one responsible for the progression of my own soul and its change of its condition or location. We could talk a lot more about it, but it's about me being an individual. Now, one of the first elements of that individuality is to have the humility and the personal desire to know the truth about the influences that are stopping me from being myself. I mean, this is really about, on the one voice side, I want to know myself. Before I deal with anyone else, I want to know who I am. I sincerely desire to know my own soul. And that means, in order to even use the term soul, oftentimes that implies the existence of a creator, but not yet. Before I ever imply the existence of a creator, I must have a sincere desire to know my own existence. I want to know what I am, regardless of what you or God think about me. The sincere desire to accept that responsibility that I am the only one who can examine my fears. I am the only one who can accept the responsibility to look at all of my belief systems that are constricting my life force. The only belief systems we want to have are the belief systems that are true. So that's number one. How to be able to do that. And the first element of number one is say, whoa, I no longer want the unloving influence of my parents to be contributing to my existence. That unloving influence is the epigenetic influence that's causing me personal grief and suffering. But now I'm going to accept the responsibility that regardless of how it got to me, everything that came to me at conception and was created inside of me through gestation and through the third phase or third gate from birth out to 7 approximately, this is now my responsibility. No acceptance. I don't want to accept it. I don't want to excuse it. I don't want to blame it. I don't want to transmit it. Meaning I'm not willing to accept it as me. I accept the fact that, okay, I've got mud all around me. But I'm going to now accept the responsibility that the only way I can remove it is to have a sincere desire to remove it. Now, the danger is that there's going to end up being 2 pathways to remove it. One pathway is getting all kinds of help to remove it. And there is a coliseum of help to remove it. All kinds of influences of practitioners and gurus and prophets and priests and masters and ministers and you name it, there's a whole series of theological representatives who desire to be the intermediary to my experience. There's a whole coliseum of influence, including spirits who want to help me change my spirit body. And they will band together by the thousands to help me change my spirit body so I feel better, without actually having to examine the dark stuff I got. Now, the other pathway in this coliseum is like looking down below and you see a very small doorway, big enough for my shoulders to fit through. And in that doorway, the only one responsible for the removal of all that is me. I can't use nutritional practitioners, vibrational practitioners, theologians, or anybody else, spiritual or otherwise, to help me remove it. to accept 100% of the responsibility to remove it. Now, once that is done, the desire to do so, now I can begin to explore what it's like to remove it as an individual. The primary element there would be the exercise of free will. That free will would give me the consideration of looking around and go, you know what? I like music, music's perfect. I like nature, nature's beautiful. I look at the universe, wow, it's perfect. I look at physics, I look at all these things I don't comprehend, and there may well be a creator because it's so perfect. So now I'm going to explore with my individuality and my free will a direct and uninterrupted or unmediated relationship with the creator who made my own soul. Get the general idea. So the smaller door is a completely individual door.
So, question to this: would you describe in those sectors of father's mother or mother's father, in those lower medial sectors, differences between seeing jewels there as opposed to flowers or shaker or it being stream-like in those sectors?
Yes. So a jewel or a flower is going to indicate the probable type of fear involved. And then the location of that mark is going to be an indication of which part of the family tree it probably came from or the topic that it's about. So if it's always a flower in the middle, it's going to be a social relationship issue. If it's a flower or jewel closer to the perimeter of the pupil, it's going to be another issue entirely. If it's out to the perimeter, it's usually a broader or global issue that's involved with it.
Denny, so if I understand you correctly, the shaker is formed from a parental disharmony?
All of the patterns are related to parental disharmonies. In some form or another, they're all related to how each one of them is reflected in the formation of the iris. Because all of them, mother and father, have contributed all of those causal fear or pain issues related to where they came from, what they're like, their belief systems, their rage, their emotions, their addictions. They're all involved in the same location.
But with the stream type, there tends to be a more harmonious family relationship, generally more connected, more nurturing, more loving, which creates a more grounded personality, but it still has fears.
Sure. Now that is what is the more loving family is oftentimes the neuroses of connectedness in order to compensate for the fear. So they produce this sense of let's all be together, hold each other, keep the family close, we'll hold everything tight as a way of defending the aggression of outside forces. It's a fear-based phenomenon, and it produces nice people, usually toward their own family first. Usually not true with jewels and shakers. They usually are out of that family structure, whereas the stream, and particularly the stream jewel types, they like to conclusively hold the family unit together, which ultimately becomes a suffocating force, violating number one, violating free will, violating individuality, making a cookie cutter out of children. They're going to fit into the model of family.
And in some ways, they seem less ready for the challenges of the outside world because they're so protected or loved.
Yes, that's correct. So they're not comfortable dealing with emotional independence or intellectual freedom or a self-responsible mobility. You know, flower, jewel, and shaker. Now that's why, you know, oftentimes, oh yes, our family and the whole family is close together, whether it's on a farm or it's in a community or it's we're all together as one. It actually can be a very damaging effect, and it is a mannerism of suffocating the soul's own growth. Because the soul's growth is only going to occur as a result of the individuality and the humility to release all of that. Because eventually their goal is to completely release their parents. Many parents, they want to see the relationship of each child as a subsequent keeper of the farm or holder or responsible for their well-being when they're older. The whole family should be together when somebody's eating. The whole family should be together when somebody's born. Somebody dies. It may look nice from the outside, but the reality is soul-based suffocation. Suffocation is a characteristic of the stream, and they oftentimes like an orderly mannerism. Now you can take the stream-based constitution and have any degree of left brain or right brain. You can have a very left brain jewel, very right brain jewel, very right brain flower, very left brain flower, or stream or shaker. You can modify all of that based on their hemispheric dominance and even their birth order manifestation. But the core level pattern is stream, or flower, or jewel, or shaker. All of it predicated on a different default form of fear.
And then on the other side, the shaker goes into excessive individual expression.
Yes, the excessive individuality of the escapism of the shaker jewel.
And do they have a relationship with the subconscious pain?
It's a method of dealing with the fear. It's an escapism through individuality, or travel, or change, or instability. So you can look at, we could go through and describe them, you know, you and I, the three of us, could talk about all those personality attributes for a very long time. Some of those are discussed in other locations. But the reality is really look at the fear that's driving it. How do we begin to accept the responsibility to find the fear that's driving the constitutional type? Even if we like it. I mean, the kinesthetic type likes being orderly, controlled, and consolidating. They like it. They feel more comfortable doing it. The flower type loves doing the emotional, feeling, visual stuff and all of the theatrical stuff. The jewel type loves the reading and understanding and the explaining, right? They love that part. They don't really want to give it up. But most of it's driven by fear.
You mentioned the flowers push away as well. What's the mechanism there? Because that's the opposite of the abandonment.
Yeah, but they'll do this. You know, they'll do this "come on and go away" thing. Yeah. Come on and go away. Come on and go away. Come on and go away. You know, they like that theatrical form of "hello, hi, come see me, but go away."
Yeah. Yes.
That's a very flower characteristic. You could describe that more and more in lots of different mannerisms, but it is a fear-based phenomenon. You know, so I'm saying, okay, wait. Let's get down to number one, medial positions of the iris, lower medial, deal with the adrenal control mechanisms. Because it's going to be the adrenal function in the two that's regulating all of the experiences in the one. So until we master the fear mechanisms, we can't move from the one to the two. So how do we master the fear mechanisms driven by the auditory functions of the adrenals and the visual functions of the adrenals, and the other ones, taste and smell and touch, all providing different parts of the same fear. How do we deal with the fear? When we're trained not to go to fear, we're trained not to talk to strangers. We're trained stranger danger, intruder alert. We're trained to stay away from new ideas, things that are not proven. It's a common characteristic.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the fear is at the 2 level.
The control mechanism of the fear is at the 2. In order to come out of the 1, we have to pass through the 1 to the 2.
Yeah.
So what's the first fear we have to face?
Change?
It's going to be mother and father. And all of the contribution that mother and father made to imprint or embed or to cultivate the fear.
And it's incredible to spend time with parents and young children and see how many times the child is warned about something.
Yes. Be afraid. Don't go there. Watch that. Eat this. Don't do that. Behave this. Don't go there. Read this. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Constantly being controlled by parameters of fear.
And
if you don't do that, I'm going to take this away from you.
Yes. And what it means is the parents haven't dealt with their own fears.
That's correct.
It's handed on.
They've handed on the same fears that now become different in each subsequent generation. Those fears are going to be active.
So
that's the new way of the iris.
The old positions chart of the iris has some fears involved with it. So if you go into that lower medial and you go into solitude or enlightenment, you know, there's fears of insanity or...
So,
you know, I respect that those fears have been put in there by myself at a different time. And that chart was made in the early 80s. And I know that there's some usefulness and some accuracy there. But I would say there's probably 30% or 40% that's not accurate. And I would say it requires constant checking and to see if that works. I'm much more comfortable with the more simplified approach now and what those fears represent.
Yeah, so for a practitioner seeing different signs in those sectors of the iris, in the more, you know, a social or a global area, whether it's a jewel or a flower, will we one day have the sort of map to more accurately describe?
Yes,
those
this is what we're going to work on, is a description of the fears at each one of the rungs of the ladder, right? What are the fears down at the bottom? What are the fears in the middle? What are the fears at the top? Simplified, right? And then we'll have, on the iris, we'll have the rings. The fears in the middle ring, the first ring, the middle ring, and the outside ring. And we'll see the difference between fears about self toward the inside or the bottom of the iris, fears about others in the second ring of the iris, and in the middle sectors. So all of the middle sectors of 3 and 4, in the middle of the iris, on the lateral and medial side, will be all about 3 and 4. So what are the fears at 3 and 4? Community, resources, private resources, sharing, justice, fairness, relationship integration, betrayal, loyalty, a whole bunch of stuff's at 3 and 4. but it goes up to 5, it goes into another octave and goes into a cultural dynamic at 5 that mirrors a cultural dynamic at 3. Meaning first I'm going to have a cultural dynamic with my community. That community is oftentimes going to be my brothers and sisters too, by the way. Siblings are going to have a lot of influence. Can we share our resources? Can we trust each other? Is there integrity? Is there ethics? Is there justice? Is there wisdom? Is there truth? Is there jealousy? Is there envy? Is there greed? All of that at 3 affecting the pancreas and the liver. Then it's going to go up to heart, which is one-to-one giving, relationship integration with somebody sweet or special. When it flips into 5, it takes the community up to an octave and makes it global. Now I'm in a global community, which is my culture against your culture instead of my community and your community, and my toys and your toys. Completely different dynamic. Then you can do the same thing at each one of the levels. So eventually, a body-based practitioner is going to be able to look at the iris, the birth order, and the body type, and have a pretty good idea what the emotions are that person needs to release in order for them to be able to become more self-responsible with their emotions and their healing.
So part of that releasing of the emotion is to go into the fear and ask to feel it more deeply and go into your earliest childhood memories of that fear, and then ask to feel where it is in the family tree?
Now we're on another recording. This is what to do when you have the information from the iris, which is a whole other recording about, which really requires, how do you open the gate at number 1? Because there's a whole bunch of information about how number 1 really works. Because number 1 is also controlling the life force at the bottom of the spine. And if you want to open up the life force, it means you have to be able to dilate the emotional capacity to feel while having the integrity to be able to manage it, but not filtered by false belief systems. But, big job.
So you could relate those gates to the chakra system.
Yes, but as long as we understand the chakra systems are of the vibrational body only. They're how the vibrational body interfaces between the soul and the material body. So yes, does that help you understand the chakra system as it goes up? Yes. But some of the ways that I see the chakra system understood or taught just doesn't feel right at all. It's far more useful to relate it to people like a grandparent or a gland or an organ, more so than an abstract concept of a chakra. It's an emotional-based lesson. I mean, the emotional-based lessons at 1 are quite intense. The emotional-based lessons at 2 are different, but also intense. Then the big jump comes from taking 1 and 2, which is about self, and taking it into 3 and 4, which is myself and the community.
And in intimacy as well.
Yes, and intimacy, challenge. Taking my lower body and putting it into somebody else's body. How my body fits into a community without suffocating or controlling or regulating. And a lot of that has to do with trust and fairness and equality. Any inequality at 3 between man and woman causes a great disturbance at 3. And we all know that there has been centuries of inequality between man and woman.
And that extends out to global, first world, third world.
Yes, it does. Now that inequality has a lot to do with the disruption of the metabolic system. So the whole metabolic system regulated at 3 with the pancreas and the liver, and how that vital force is going to be moved to the body chemistry. That whole 3 level we could talk about for a very long time. But my suggestion is that we keep this video just onto the constitutional understanding of the iris and how it's related to fears. And then later we go into what we might do to be able to begin to remove them. So any direct questions about the Constitution?
Just on the fears, Denny, at the 6th, the fear of death.
Yes, a fear of death is one of them, or a lack of optimism about the future. Because a lot of older people, by the time they're 50 or 60, they've lost optimism for the future.
So we did a more lengthy description of stream and shaker when we were talking about the layers and the fears. Should we talk a little bit more about jewel and flower?
We can. There's a whole series of types of fears that the interface of flower and stream have similar, like separation and abandonment. But there's also a similarity between stream and jewel because they're both constrictive.
Yeah.
There's a similarity between flower and shaker because they're both mobile. Second.
And yet the dual fear of control is a bit shaker-like too, isn't it? The shaker doesn't like to be...
Sure. The 3 of us could slice and dice these into so many different discussions. We could vary those on 1 boy and 2 boy and 3 girl. But if we just get a good feeling for what's there, I mean, it's a profound thing to say that the structure of the iris is actually an indication of our fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
That the personality of the flower or the stream or the jewel or any combination thereof is actually more a manifestation of their facade.
Yes.
That facade is a control mechanism designed to avoid the fear,
Yes.
not deal with the fear. How to compensate or how to medicate.
It's an
And
obvious
that's a big change for me about the feeling of the structure of the iris. That we're looking at constitutional fear. And then specific sectors or types of fear. And lots of endless permutations of it. And then you can look at all of the symptoms of either behavior or the body and end up with an understanding of the fears that are driving it. So then the next discussion comes into, okay, so what are we actually going to do about it? What are the mathematical steps to be in harmony with the divine sequence? I've always had a love of the sequences. And I do believe that there's a sequence to the ladder, there's a sequence to the birth order, sequences to the times of the day, the maturation cycle from birth to death. There are sequences. And there may well be sequences about how we access and open the gates. How do we access and open these gates? If we desire to open them, which would mean we would have to have a sincere desire to want to face the fears that we've always been avoiding, rather than to continually be engaged in activities to avoid them. The constant avoidance or reaction using blame or anger or attack or arrogance or passiveness or depression, cancer, stroke, heart attack, these are all the result of unresolved fears inside the person. So that's why the use of the iris to understand the fear begins to orient them to what they can do to resolve the fear. And that's a whole other topic. That's worth a tape on its own.
And some of those fears will come into the rings as well.
Of course. Of course. All of the rings have their corresponding diameter of fear. The smallest diameter being I'm afraid of myself, or I'm ashamed of myself, I'm worthless, I'm no good, I'm afraid of failure in my own life, I don't like myself. It's all about self, 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 self. Then the ring coming further out is, how do I fit into a peer group? How do I fit into a social network? Which very much happens between 12 and 30. How do I fit? How do I get into the system? Then later on, it's different. People who are over 60, they're really afraid of dying, or they're lost all the optimism for the future. The only way to live a good life past 60 is to have an optimism for what comes next. For the next 300 years. And have a seamless willingness to move forward without despair and loneliness or hopelessness or fear that the devil's going to take you to hell, or there's going to be nothing, or
Aloneness.
Go back and do your rosary again or something.
Well, my kids aren't going to be okay.
Yeah, my kids aren't going to be okay. So fear about the future, concern, it's not really true.
What about the fear of the harmony pattern thing?
We could go into a whole section on the ring of 5 and 6. I have another way of being able to see 5 and 6, or 3 and 4, or 1 and 2. But these are all going to be related to the underlying fears of the constitutions. So if we look at the fears of the constitutions, we're actually going to be looking at all of our fears. So I'm going to have kinesthetic fears, I'm going to have flower fears, I'm going to have jewel fears, I'm going to have shaker fears in a different proportion for me than somebody else. But I'm going to have them all. And then I'm going to need to be responsible to want to feel them and address them, because I accept the responsibility that I'm the only one that can. No practitioner can take away your fear. They can guide you to them, or they can manipulate you away from not feeling them, which many practitioners do. There's lots of ways to avoid them. We can even biochemical them away. We can get high, or we can be drunk, or we can do an opium pipe as a way of avoiding a fear. Or music, or running, or exercise. Lots of things that people do to drive dopamines.
And the fears really are undermining the adrenals. And the reaction to the fears, which is constant busyness and activities, depleting the adrenals further.
Yeah, so all of that fear-oriented stuff with the adrenals ruled by the thyroid function. So the 5 and the 2 are very closely related. But the 5 has a lot to do with personal choice. That's how I'm going to handle my individuality and my free will. I'm either going to stay busy to avoid my fear at 2 and 1, or I'm going to take my 5 and go down to my 1 and go, hello there, hi, how are you? Face your fear, turn around. So my suggestion is that we pause here on this recording, and we'll come back to another recording at another time about, okay, so now what? But let's be clear that this is only an introduction to the topic. This is not meant to be all-inclusive of all the variables. But just for now, this was about the iris and the new orientation about fear. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, DJ.
Thank you.